other times where I will deadhead. Absolutely, no question about it. But it's all about the numbers. It's not about emotion. See, that reaction, nobody is ever putting freight on my truck for 96 cents a mile. That's an emotional reaction. I do it by the numbers. For me, there is no such thing as cheap freight. In business, for me, there's no such thing as a cheap anything. I look for value. Value has nothing to do with cost or price. Value is very different. So don't get emotional. Don't get into this say no to cheap freight mentality, because there's not a person in this room who can define what cheap freight really means. Because almost any load you define as cheap, I could define a situation where it would make total sense to take that load. That doesn't mean we would take it every time. Of course not. That doesn't mean we go out looking for the cheapest freight. Of course not. I'm looking for the best paying freight I can find. But sometimes that best paying freight is what we think of as a cheap number. I can get a great rate going into Florida because there's lots of freight going down there, there's nothing coming back. So if all these trucks get into Florida taking all this freight in, and there's only a little bit of freight coming out and a lot of trucks, what happens? Of course the rate goes down. This is supply and demand, guys. So some people will deadhead from Miami to Atlanta to get up to an area where they start getting freight again. Well, it's going to take me till tomorrow to get up to Atlanta if it's late in the afternoon, so I'm not going to be able to get a load until tomorrow anyway. Well, what if I could grab a load paying 80 cents a mile from Miami to Atlanta and I can still get there tomorrow? Why wouldn't I do that? Why would I sit till tomorrow hoping things will get better? They don't get better in Florida. Why would I deadhead to Atlanta getting 0 per mile? 0 per mile is the ultimate in cheap freight, guys. Let me tell you. That's cheap freight. 10 cents a mile is better than 0. But we get so emotional about this cheap freight thing. Well, that attitude's driving rates down. No, it's not. Rates are determined by how much freight there is, how many trucks there are. That is what determines 90% of the rate. What determines the other 10%? Not the broker. Brokers don't set rates in this industry. Supply and demand accounts for 90% of the rate. I can look at any freight rate in this country and show you why it is what it is through supply and demand. But that's about 90%. What's the other 10%?
Negotiation.
Your ability to negotiate and provide value to the customer. That's where the other 10% comes from. So let's think about that. If somebody doesn't know how to negotiate and they don't really understand the concept of providing value, then they're going to get that same rate that everybody else does, that is 90%. So the average owner-operator today, it's not all that hard to generate $200,000 in revenue, right? That's not hard to do in a year. But if we could do 10% better than that, we'd do $220,000 a year instead. And all we had to do was learn a couple things: how to negotiate better and how to provide real value to customers. Can you go read a book to learn those things? Thousands of books. And you just raise your revenue by 10% or 20 grand a year. Otherwise, rates are supply and demand.